on great books. In 1952, Encyclopedia Britannica published Great Books of the Western World in 54 volumes. The series is probably the most famous collection of quote-unquote great books. The series sought to promote liberal education, give readers familiarity with the Western canon, and engage them in the quote-unquote great conversation, the history of the development of ideas. With the increased interest in classical education in recent years, the series is highly relevant in that it seeks to provide books for something like a classical education. In many ways, the series succeeds. But it also falls short and is not without criticism. Some criticism has come from the quote-unquote left, wishing that there would be more so-called diversity in the series, or more so-called radical texts. Readers might wonder why I might criticize standard texts from the Western canon, given that I am a promoter of classical texts, historic Western ideas in theology and philosophy, etc. The rubber meets the proverbial road in that the series fails in its omissions and includes many texts that are not great at all, unless one only means greatly influential, which the editors expressly deny is the purpose, or greatly evil, which is merely to say, not great at all, but rather the opposite. Perhaps the most obvious example is Volume 50, which is Marx and Engels, Capital, and Manifesto of the Communist Party. This is probably an uncontroversial take from anyone right of center, but I maintain that this is merely the most extreme example of a widespread problem in the series. The reader must first understand that the so-called liberal education mentioned by the editors is not the classical education program. Liberal in this series refers to Enlightenment liberalism, which promotes different values than the classic seven: faith, hope, love, prudence, justice, temperance, fortitude, under a different curriculum, not the trivium and quadrivium. In many ways, the Enlightenment sought to untangle itself from this classical system and instead make something new, which may occasionally borrow from the classical system, but is not in itself based on the classical system. For example, freedom might be prized in both the classical and the Enlightenment systems, but this term does not have the same definition. In another example, a mixed polity government may be promoted both by Aristotle and Renaissance humanists in the classical tradition, and liberals in the Enlightenment tradition. But what that looks like in the Enlightenment tradition does not look the same necessarily. Not only this, but the series in volumes 2 to 3 provide a list of topics of so-called great ideas. Each volume is supposed to discuss at least 25 of these 102 great ideas. But if one looks at these ideas, one will find an Enlightenment liberal bias. For example, evolution, slavery, and science are included. None of these topics on their own are in themselves problematic. But categorizing these things as part of great ideas reveals some bias when other great ideas are missing. For example, faith, hope, love, fortitude, grammar, geometry, music, etc. This misstep may seem small, but it is borne out strongly in the series. A great deal of focus is placed on utilitarian advancements and Enlightenment ideas, and more on this in a moment. In a classical education, the emphasis is on the promotion of virtue through the trivium and quadrivium in grammar, logic, rhetoric, math, geometry, music, and astronomy, these last two having differing definitions from the modern usage. Quote-unquote STEM fields, that is, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, are not unrelated to these. The quadrivium is tightly related to STEM, but STEM in itself today, and for most of the modern period, is highly focused on utilitarian ends, not promotion of virtue. STEM fields are seen as a means to the end of improved production of goods and the like, not an end in and of themselves, as is conceived in a classical sense. And many of the later works and great books of the Western world reflect the former, not the latter. These more abstract critiques bring us to the more particular discussion of book choices. Perhaps the most obvious way that these biases play out in the series is just looking at the period choice of volumes. Volumes 1 to 3 are introductory. Volumes 4 to 18 are classical period. Volumes 19 to 22 are medieval, though volumes 21 and 22 are proto-Renaissance volumes. Volumes 23 to 29 and volume 32 are Renaissance and Scientific Revolution. Volumes 30 to 31 and 33 to 47 are early modern period Enlightenment works, for the most part. Volumes 48 through 54, or 60 if we include the second edition, are modern period works downstream of the Enlightenment. Some changes in the second edition are positive. Volumes 20, 23, 43, and 44 offer some more Renaissance works and some early modern and modern period works that are a move away from Enlightenment ideas. One notices immediately that the medieval period is practically glossed over. The early medieval period does not have a single work. The high medieval period has a single work abridged from 3 original volumes into 2. The late medieval period has 2 proto-Renaissance works. Roughly 1,000 years are given 4 volumes total. The classical period has some good representation, but spans roughly 1,200 years in 15 volumes. The Renaissance, roughly 300 years, gets 6 volumes. The Scientific Revolution, concurrent with the Renaissance and into the early modern period, gets 4 volumes. The Enlightenment, roughly 200 years, gets 12 volumes. The modern period, roughly 200 years, gets the rest, 11 or 24 volumes, depending on if you include the second edition. The numbers don't exactly add up to 54 or 60 in the second edition, because some figures fit into multiple categories. Roughly speaking, there's a heavy bias in the works from 1500 onward. Every volume added in the second edition was from after 1500. 21 volumes are from before 1500. In the first edition, this means that there are 30 works after 1500. In the second edition, there are 36. Roughly 2,200 years is put into 21 volumes, while roughly 500 is put into 36 volumes. This is not for lack of great extant works prior to 1500. There are many. It's also noteworthy which works were chosen from these periods. The 2 late medieval volumes, 21 to 22, that is, Dante and Chaucer, are proto-Renaissance works, rather than works specifically representing the unique character of the late medieval period, such as folk fiction and epics, poets and musical texts, German mystical works, late scholastic works, nominalist philosophy, etc. Volume 23 is Machiavelli and Hobbes. Both of these are transitional figures who can be classified as Renaissance figures, but as I have argued previously, Machiavelli is a proto-Enlightenment figure, and Hobbes is himself a founder of the Enlightenment. Volume 25 is Montaigne, another proto-Enlightenment figure, argued in the same post I mentioned earlier, being a skeptic who sets up for Enlightenment foundationalism. The early modern period is skewed as well. The Enlightenment and Scientific Revolution get strong representation. The former is overrepresented, but this is not at all characteristic of the period as a whole. In the 1500s to 1600s, the dominant ideas were still classical/medieval thought, especially that of Aristotle and late Renaissance developments. But this would not be the idea one gets from the Great Books series. Not a single work of Renaissance or Baroque scholasticism, works built primarily on Aristotelian and subsequent medieval and humanist developments, is included, despite this being the primary literary output of the universities. Among Renaissance works that are not proto-Enlightenment, only fiction is included. No exploration of their ideas directly, only works that explore these themes through fiction. Very little is included in the series in terms of works opposing the Enlightenment. Perhaps the only works in the series that show opposition to Enlightenment thought are Goethe's Faust, volume 47, Tolstoy's War and Peace, volume 51, Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov, volume 52, and Hegel, volume 46, 3 of which are fiction works, and Tolstoy and Hegel are very mixed bags in this respect. The second edition does include Calvin's Institutes, volume 20, and Erasmus, volume 23, which better represent Renaissance humanism without being Proto-Enlightenment works. Kierkegaard and Nietzsche, volume 43, for some existential philosophy, more of a different turn in thought than opposition to the Enlightenment, and Alexis de Tocqueville, volume 44, which is a liberal work but offers some critiques of the same. But the second edition also intentionally adds quote-unquote diversity, meaning diverse authors, not diverse ideas, and included figures such as Voltaire, a rather radical Enlightenment figure. I cannot entirely blame the editors of the series for some of the bias. Daniel Novotny has pointed out that Renaissance and Baroque scholasticism is basically an unexplored area academically, and Isaiah Berlin's seminal works in Counter-Enlightenment were not published until after the second edition of Great Books. Yet one cannot help but see the apparent bias for Enlightenment ideas in the second half of the series when there were popular options otherwise. Burke, Herder, Hawthorne, Coleridge, Cooper, etc. Excusing the editors does not mean that we should simply follow them, however. Next, I offer an alternative 60-volume set to the Great Books series that I believe balances it better and provides for a liberal education in the classical sense of that term. This new set is still biased. It is biased in a classical and counter-Enlightenment direction. I do not pretend to be unbiased here. Rather, I believe this set better represents what is great about Western works of literature. I have not omitted figures for simple disagreements, nor do I endorse everything in these volumes. The editors of the original series say that they themselves do not pretend to agree with everything said in the volumes, but rather present them as important to the history of ideas. I have kept some Enlightenment liberal works for this purpose, and have modified some volumes that I retained. Some liberal thinkers I have kept offer critiques of the liberal tradition: Burke, Tocqueville, Ames, and others can be read with a more critical lens, even if that wasn't the original intent. Melville, for example. Volumes 1 to 3 would need revision, but I will not go into that any more in depth here. There are many figures I would have liked to include, but space is limited with only 60 volumes. Here's a brief summary of the categories into which the new volumes fall. The series has 3 introductory volumes, just like the original. There are 23 classical period volumes, with 13 volumes before 1 AD and 10 after 1 AD, beginning with Homer in 800 BC and ending with Isidore of Seville, who is the last classical thinker and died in 636 AD. 10 volumes of the Middle Ages, beginning with Bede, who lived 672 to 735, and ending with Chaucer, who died in 1400. 2 volumes of the early Middle Ages are included, 6 volumes of the High Middle Ages, and 3 in the Late Middle Ages. The inclusion of Islamic and Jewish works may be controversial in a series of the Western canon, but these works were built on classical Western sources and subsequently influenced medieval Western figures. 8 volumes of Renaissance material, beginning with Copernicus, who lived 1473 to 1543, and ending with Milton, who died in 1674. 1 volume of Baroque scholastic work is included, namely Volume 38, which is Poinsot and Scherzer. 3 volumes of Scientific Revolution, beginning with Copernicus, who lived 1473 to 1543, and ending with Leibniz, who died in 1716, though volumes 27 to 30 treat some medieval scientific developments and some scientific topics which are touched in Poinsot and Scherzer. 7 volumes contain Enlightenment themes, beginning with Gilbert, who lived 1544 to 1603, and ending with de Tocqueville, who died in 1859. 15 volumes are in the early modern period as a whole, beginning with Luther, who lived from 1484 to 1546, and ending with de Maistre, who died in 1821. 12 volumes contain Counter-Enlightenment themes of some variety, beginning with Barrow, who lived 1630 to 1677, and ending with Herbert, who died in 1986. 12 modern period volumes are included, beginning with Wordsworth, who lived 1770 to 1880, and ending with Herbert, who died in 1986. Here follows the list of the books. When I have not listed all of the works in a volume, it is because it is a volume from the original series, and you can simply go look up the volume there. Volume 1 is The Great Conversation, a modified volume of the original. Volumes 2 to 3 are the Syntopicon, once again modified from the original. Volume 4 is Homer, and it matches Volume 4 from the original. Volume 5 is Hesiod and Homeric works, including the Theogony, Works and Days, the Shield of Heracles, Homeric hymns, and the Homerica. Volume 6 is incomplete Hesiod works and pre-Socratic philosophy. This includes works of Hesiod, Catalogue of Women, Megalae Eohai, Wedding of Ceyx, Melampodia, Descent of Parathous, Idaean Dactyls, Precepts of Chiron, Megala Erga, Astronomia, Aegemius, Kiln, and Biographical Testimonies. It also includes the Ancilla to the Pre-Socratics, the Older Sophists, and the Delphic Maxims. Volume 7 is Aeschylus, Sophocles, Euripides, and Aristophanes, Volume 5 of the original. Volume 8 is Herodotus and Thucydides, Volume 6 of the original. Volume 9 is Plato's Tetralogies, 1 through 5. This is a modified version of Volume 7 in the original. And, in Volume 10, Plato's Tetralogies, 6 through 9, a modified version of Volume 7 again. So Volume 7 was expanded into 2 volumes to include all of Plato. Volume 9 is Other Socratic Works. It includes the various spurious Platonic works, and includes Xenophon, specifically his Memoirs of Socrates, Apology of Socrates, Symposium, Economicus, Anabasis, and Hellenica. Volume 12 is Aristotle, Volume 8 in the original, and Volume 13 is again Aristotle, which is Volume 9 of the original. All of Aristotle is included. Volume 14 is Hippocrates and Galen, Volume 10 in the original. Volume 15, Euclid, Archimedes, Apollonius, and Nicomachus, Volume 11 in the original. Volume 16 is Cicero, which includes In Verum, Catilinarian Orations, Philippics, On Oration, On the Republic, On the Laws, On Duties, On the Ends of Good and Evil, and On the Nature of the Gods. Volume 17 is Seneca. It includes his moral letters to Lucilius, on the happy life, on the shortness of life, on anger, on benefits, Thyestes, on providence, on the tranquility of the mind. Volume 18 is Lucretius, Epictetus, and Marcus Aurelius, Volume 12 in the original. Volume 19 is Virgil, Volume 13 in the original. Volume 20 is Plutarch, Volume 14 in the original. Volume 21 is Tacitus, Volume 15 in the original. Volume 22 is Ptolemy, Copernicus, and Kepler, Volume 16 in the original. Volume 23 is Plotinus, Volume 17 in the original. Volume 24 is Augustine, Volume 18 in the original. Volume 25 is Ecclesiastical History. This volume includes Eusebius and the continuation by Rufinus. Selections from Socrates, Sozomen, Theodoret, and Evagrius's Church Histories, Sulpicius Severus, his Ecclesiastical History, and selection from Bede's History of the English Church. Volume 24 is Boethius and Isidore of Seville. It includes Boethius's Consolation of Philosophy and his theological treatises, and Isidore includes his selections from Origins, that is, the Etymologiarium. Volume 27 is Alcuin of York, John Scotus Eriugena, Pope Sylvester II, and Anselm of Canterbury. From Alcuin, you get On Dialectic, Eriugena, selections from On the Division of Nature, the Paris Phaeon, Sylvester, Selected Correspondence, and Anselm, the Monologion, Proslogion, and Why God Became Man. Volume 28 is Avicenna. Selections from the Book of Healing, selections from the Metaphysics, selections from the Book of Knowledge, selections from the Canon of Medicine, and selections from the Eastern Philosophy. Volume 29 is Averroes and Al-Ghazali. Al-Ghazali is The Incoherence of the Philosophers. And Averroes, selections from De Anima, Nicomachean Ethics and Physics, The Incoherence of the Incoherence, The Decisive Treatise, and On the Harmony of Religion and Philosophy. Volume 30 is Maimonides, selections from the Guide for the Perplexed, the Mishnah Torah and Medical Writings, Introduction to Pirkei Avot, 13 Principles of Faith, and Letter to Yemen. Volumes 31 and 32 are selections from Aquinas' Summa Theologiae, which are volumes 19 and 20 in the original series. Volume 33 is Thomas von Kempis, Julian of Norwich, Meister Eckhart, Johannes Tauler, and anonymous works. From Kempis, Imitation of Christ. From Julian, Revelations of Divine Love. From Eckhart, Sermon Selections. From Tauler, Sermon Selections. And of anonymous works, the Theologia Germanica and the Cloud of Unknowing. Volume 34 is Dante, Volume 21 in the original. Volume 25 is Chaucer, Volume 22 in the original. Volume 36 is Martin Luther, his Small Catechism, selections from the Large Catechism, the Small Called Articles, selections from the Bondage of the Will, On Secular Authority, The Freedom of a Christian, An Open Letter to the Christian Nobility of the German Nation, and selections from the Table Talk. Volume 37 is Desiderius Erasmus, The Praise of Folly, Volume 23 in the second edition. Volume 38 is John Poinsot and Johann Adam Scherzer. From Poinsot, selections from the Cursus Philosophicus Thomisticus. From Scherzer, Axiomata Resoluta. Volume 39 is Shakespeare, Part 1, Volume 26 in the original, and Volume 40 is Shakespeare Part 2, Volume 27 in the original. Volume 41 is William Gilbert, Galileo Galilei, and William Harvey, Volume 28 in the original. Volume 42 is Francis Bacon, René Descartes, Robert Hooke, Isaac Newton, Robert Boyle, Isaac Barrow, and Tycho Brahe. From Bacon, the Novum Organon, abridged. From Descartes, Discourse on the Method. From Hooke, Micrographia. From Newton, selections from the Mathematical Principles of Natural Philosophy. From Boyle, selections from the Skeptical Chemist. From Barrow, selected lectures. From Brahe, Instruments of the Renewed Astronomy. And from Leibniz, select correspondence. Volume 43 is Miguel de Cervantes, is Don Quixote. Volume 29 in the original. Volume 44 is John Milton, Volume 32 in the original. Volume 45 is Adam Smith, Volume 39 in the original. Volume 46 is Kant and Hamann, a modified version of Volume 42 in the original. From Kant, the Critique of Pure Reason, Critique of Practical Reason, and Critique of Judgment. From Hamann, the Metacritique of Pure Reason, the Socratic Memorabilia, and excerpts from the London Writings. Volume 47 is Kierkegaard and Nietzsche. This is Volume 43 in the second edition. Kierkegaard's Fear and Trembling and Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil. From Volume 48, American Founding Works. This is a modified version of Volume 43 in the original. It includes the American State Papers, that is, the Declaration of Independence, Articles of Confederation, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights. It includes The Federalist by Hamilton, Madison, and Jay, and includes some writing by Ames, namely The Dangers of American Liberty, Political State of America, Mire of Democracy, Speech on the Jay Treaty, and Selected Letters. Volume 49 is William Wordsworth, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, Nathaniel Hawthorne, and James Fenimore Cooper. From Wordsworth and Coleridge, lyrical ballads and selected poetry. From Hawthorne, The Scarlet Letter, The House of Seven Gables, and selected short stories. From Cooper, The Last of the Mohicans. Volume 50 is Tocqueville, Volume 44 in the second edition. Volume 51 is Edmund Burke, namely his A Philosophical Inquiry into the Origin of Our Ideas of the Sublime and Beautiful, Reflections on the Revolution in France, Thoughts on the Cause of the Present Discontents, his speech on conciliation with the colonies, his speech on the impeachment of Warren Hastings, letters on a regicide peace, and selected correspondence. Volume 52 is Johann Gottfried von Herder, Joseph de Maistre, François-René de Chateaubriand, and Novalis. From Herder, selections from an outline of a history of a philosophy of man, and on the origin of language. De Maistre, considerations on France, and his St. Petersburg dialogues. From Chateaubriand, selections from The Genius of Christianity, and from Novalis, Hymns to the Night, and Faith and Love. Volume 53 is Melville, Moby Dick, Volume 48 in the original. Volume 54, Goethe's Faust, Volume 47 in the original. Volume 55, Tolstoy, War and Peace, Volume 51 in the original. Volume 56, Dostoevsky, The Brothers Karamazov, Volume 52 in the original. Volume 57, Tolkien, The Hobbit and the Fellowship of the Ring, Volume 58, Tolkien, The Two Towers and the Return of the King, Volume 59, C.S. Lewis, Mere Christianity, Screwtape Letters, The Great Divorce, The Abolition of Man, On Stories, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and Till We Have Faces. And Volume 60, Frank Herbert, Dune. Let me know what you think of my selections in the comments. Did I do well? What books would you have added? What books did I add that you think were bad options? Were there any books that I kept that you would have removed? And let me know your thoughts in general on great books. Hey everyone, thanks for watching another Scholastic Lutherans video. If you'd like to support us, you can follow us on Twitter at Gerhard's Ghost, or contribute on Patreon at Scholastic Lutherans. There you'll get access to our Telegram chat and other perks. Links can be found in the description. Subscribe, like, or leave a comment, and have a nice day.